European Values Summit. It is definitely not my first engagement with the European values, but it is the first one in my new role as President of the Czech Republic. I have to say that European values represents for me a body that deals with security issues. For a long time, it's well known for it internationally, and also security matters were in the center of our attention for a number of years, in different forms. First, as pandemics that affected the whole world, then commodity crisis, energy crisis, supply chains, but also a number of cyber attacks and extremist acts around the globe. All these issues were related to our overall security. But now we are facing a much greater threat in a form of the biggest war conflict in Europe since the Second World War. This conflict represents an entirely new reality for all of us. It created a shift in security doctrines around the globe and changed our perceptions of security as well. Very few of us had the idea that we will face once again the war very similar to those in the last century, where tens of thousands of people will be killed, including a number of civilians, where millions of people will be displaced, either internally or pushed to leave their country and seek for refuge in a number of countries in Europe. And also we didn't believe that we would see war as brutal as it is now represented by Russia, targeting deliberately civilians. I visited myself Ukraine in April this year. And more to the east, Dnipro. And I faced in person how does it look when someone targets civilian targets in a format of blocks of flats where there are no military facilities, no energy supplies, and no military value targets. So these targets were chosen in a way to create order, to create a break of will to defend their own country, and to make not just Ukraine but all of the world to give away any defense and leave Ukraine to Russia. This is the reason why Russian aggression must not and will not succeed. It is in our vital interest, because what is happening now in Ukraine is not just a defense of their own country, of their sovereignty. It's a defense of the values. It's a defense of the principles on which the world in which we live is built. And if we don't want to change this world, if we don't want to be bullied by those who believe that power is the only tool that matters, it is our interest not to let Russia prevail. Ukrainians are fighting with great heroism, determination, and we should keep supporting them with the same determination. Of course, what is in stake is much greater than just our own comfort. what we witness is natural war fatigue, or we can call it Ukraine fatigue. We should do our best to prevent it because on one hand it is natural that both fighting countries will be tired by war fighting, but it is also natural that people living in other countries that are not directly affected will start losing track of what is going on in Ukraine. Internal matters will take priority over the war. We get somehow used to horrors of war, and they do not appear so painful as they were at the beginning. But we should keep reminding ourselves what is going on, and that Russian success will eventually turn into something bigger against our own countries in the future. That's why it is so important not to let this fatigue get to the ground. The world and many of us are looking towards the upcoming summit of NATO in Vilnius. This summit will not only talk about reinforcing NATO's deterrence and defense, reinforcing forward presence at the eastern flank, adopting new defense plans, but it will also define position towards Ukraine. I strongly believe that the political message to Ukraine should be clearly in terms of future Ukrainian membership both in NATO, to leave Ukraine in a security and economic void, and such a situation would inevitably lead to future problems. So if we want to have this part of Europe be more stable, we should do our best to get it as close to us as possible. Obviously, there are a number of challenges and problems on the path to full membership in these organizations, but we should at least give a clear determination that we want Ukraine in these organizations, and once the war is over, we can immediately start the process of accession. That is what Ukraine expects from us, and this is also in our vital interest to push it that way. On the result of the war in Ukraine, also the new security order in Europe will depend, and potentially not even not just Europe, but also the world. It is also clear that not just Russia, but also other countries are watching what is going on in Ukraine, especially those countries with the different forms of authoritarian rule that are in sharp contrast with democracies and are in a strategic competition. And it is in their interest to watch how democratic countries react to aggression, how fast we are, how efficient we are in getting together and delivering support, because this will define their steps in the future. The war in Ukraine is clearly the struggle for basic democratic values, and that's why it matters so much to us. And I already touched China, but it brings me to my second major point, and that is the role of People's Republic of China in a current world. There is no doubt that China was one of the cradles of civilization. It gave the world a lot in terms of science, culture, history. China also went through a tremendous transformation in the last couple of decades, especially several decades of the last century. And this transformation, on one hand, brought hundreds of millions of people from poverty, but it also created a system based on a very strict rule and control of the Chinese Communist Party, disregarding human rights, disregarding to some extent also the rules of international order. China doesn't hide that her interest is to change this world order, to get more ground for China, and also to change this world to fit more to Chinese long-term strategic interests. China behaves a different way than Russia. Russia shows mainly military power. And Russia believes that power is, and especially military power, is the only tool that matters. China put a lot of effort into education, into development, science, technology, power of economy, power of money. Well known. Their investments into not just education of their own people, but also investments to universities, especially top universities around the world, are well known. Their acquisitions to strategic infrastructure assets around the world are well known. And China is also behaving in a very smart way when it comes to dependencies. China reduces their dependencies on individual countries around the world, but at the same time increases the dependencies of the world on China. And that creates a quite dangerous mixture, because many countries around the world, including democratic countries of Europe and North America, looked at benefits of business with China and disregarded associated risks to it. And that's why we are now in a situation where our countries are strategically dependent on a number of commodities on China. Our critical infrastructure is partially or entirely owned by China. And we talk about letting China to go into building 5G networks entirely, disregarding the risk of access to critical information. These are all aspects of relations with China that we have to take in account. It's not about isolating China. It's not about not doing business with China, but we shall do it, let's say, in the same way as China does it with regard to us. Let's not create dependencies. Let's do business. Let's cooperate wherever it is beneficial to both sides. But let's have in mind that the strategic long-term interest of China, their values, are not compatible with ours. And if we don't want the world order to be changed by economic, scientific, or military power of China without us, then we have to be able to create sufficient counterbalance to be respected. And we can only achieve such a counterbalance if within the EU or NATO, but within all democratic countries around the world, and also those countries willing to cooperate with us on the same, on respect to the same values and principles. This is the only way how we can ensure that whatever change in international order will be negotiated, but not imposed. And that's why I would strongly argue, let's stay united with regard to Ukraine. Let's stay united with regard to China. let's stay united with regard to preserving the situation with Taiwan, not letting China impose her will on Taiwan, but let's respect that there are principles that have been agreed. There is a democratic rule in Taiwan, as it was in Hong Kong, which we see now to be slowly dismantled. So I believe that the world should stay democratic arrangement in Taiwan. The only way how can we protect our values and how can we protect our interests to the future is in cooperation, is in unity, and it is also in understanding where are the risks for the future. Some of them are external. I mentioned Russia, China, but some of them are also internal. And those internal ones are in lack of understanding of current world, ignorance, which will lead to accepting slow changes that are occurring right now. And without reaction, they will grow to a size that will be hardly manageable in the future. Thank you.
Our gratitude to President Pavel for his inspiring and commanding remarks is a very clear assessment of the challenges that we are facing. It is with exceptional honor that today I am pleased to introduce to you His Excellency Joseph Wu, Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from the Republic of China. Your Excellency.
Dr. Jakub Jenda, Director of the European Value Center for Security Policy, members of Parliament, ambassadors, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It gives me immense pleasure to speak to so many distinguished participants in this prestigious forum. I consider it an extraordinary honor to be in this great country, carrying the legacy of late President Havel. It is also a rare privilege for me, as Taiwan's foreign minister, who cannot travel to many capitals, to be visiting the beautiful Prague for the second time. To say that my appreciation goes to the Czech Republic is an understatement. Your generosity in welcoming me with open arms and the courage in supporting Taiwan is genuinely appreciated. I would like to thank Jakub and the European Value Center for Security Policy for putting together this forum. This is a cherished moment for friends and partners believing in the values of freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law to come together and discuss the events affecting the world today and to share our vision for tomorrow. Of course, the most pressing event of the day is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We have seen the atrocity, destruction, and the death of the innocent, war crimes that shouldn't have happened anywhere, anytime. Yet the war shows what authoritarian regimes or autocracies are capable of. Gross violations of human rights and gross violations of the most important or the most fundamental UN tenet of peaceful settlements of international dispute, a critical principle that shapes the rules-based international order and has kept the world in relative peace since the end of the Cold War. The war brought great pain to Europe. Countless displaced Ukrainians are need to generate resources to settle them in. At the same time, European countries have to provide sufficient support, especially military, to keep Ukraine alive. After all, lessons is learned that the lack of effective response in 2014 over Crimea has its terrible consequences now. The war has its far-reaching impact in the Indo-Pacific as well, where Taiwan and other like-minded partners are ramping up military, material, or moral support for Ukraine, condemning and sanctioning Russia, for we believe that the war crimes must be stopped, and autocracies cannot get away from what they have done. We want the brave Ukrainians to know that they are not alone in their fight for freedom and sovereignty. A former Ukrainian parliamentarian and now an NGO leader, Ms. Hanna Hakko, visited Taiwan last October. As a gesture of appreciation, she presented me with a Ukrainian flag with signatures of frontline soldiers on it. I was deeply moved and hung it in my ministry for permanent display as a constant reminder that freedom does not come free. One has to fight hard and even sacrifice for it. We in Taiwan are facing enormous challenges posed by the PRC, as described by many Europeans, a wealthier and more powerful authoritarian state, capable of reshaping the rules-based international order. To meet the challenges, we are drawing lessons from the war in Ukraine, with the Ukrainians' incredible bravery and resilience serving as an inspiration for Taiwan and lesson number one. Indeed, we are facing mounting gray zone military threat and economic coercion by the neighboring PRC. It has been exploiting Taiwan's very open society by conducting hybrid warfare, such as cognitive warfare, disinformation campaign, and cyber attacks. In fact, some describe that the PRC has already started a war in the cyberspace. For many military observers in the world, invasion by the PLA may not be imminent or unavoidable, and Taiwan and its partners are trying to deter it from happening. But the PRC is following Sun Tzu's art of war to try to crush the enemy without going to war. As we speak, the PRC continues to flex its muscles to intimidate Taiwan, including sending its warplanes and vessels to cross the median line of the Taiwan Strait. Whereas decades, the people of Taiwan have stayed calm and responsible for safeguarding the status quo of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. The PRC is using its everyday incursion and coercion to wear out our will to fight before the D-Day arrives. We share the same important values of freedom, democracy, human rights, and rule of law. This democratic way of life was what we have fought for in the 90s and the 80s and 90s. And it is good to see our younger generations born free. But it is very concerning that there is an opposite trend happening in Asia. The Chinese government has taught its people of a national dream. Not that the Chinese people can be free to speak, free to worship, and free to choose their government, but to rejuvenate the great nation through perpetual communist rule. The Communist Party of China is pursuing the dream by crushing what might stand in the way, domestic or abroad, and whether their actions are legitimate. Along the process of realizing the great dream, horrible stories to concentration camps. The regime thinks that the distinctively beautiful culture, religion, and ethnicity in Xinjiang may not be loyal to communism. It is upsetting to be reminded that this is nothing new. The same has been happening in Tibet for decades. After the Chinese government and the Tibetan representatives signed the peace treaty on May 23, 1951, we should not forget what happened to Hong Kong in front of our eyes. Freedoms and limited democracy enjoyed by the Hong Kong citizens were totally deprived of by the Chinese government, which has trashed the agreement it signed with the UK government. The once promised one country, two system has become the one totalitarian state system. Every time when others ask Taiwan what we think about the one country, two system model of unification, as proposed by the Chinese leaders on January 2nd, 2019, the response from the Taiwanese people is always, we would rather stay free and democratic. In fact, what happened in Hong Kong has killed the two systems formula and has also buried the sacred Chinese promise in writing, deposited in the United Nations. It is also an irony that this same government now wants to forge peace by proposing to Ukraine to give up parts of its territory for peace with Russia. Religious freedom as an important way of life lies at the core of European values and social fabric. Although this may be hard to believe, but Google it and you will find that the PRC government has destroyed thousands of crosses and churches across China. And in substitution, the CCP starts cynicizing religions and require portraits of the top leader and patriotic slogans to be displayed in religious congregations. And my stomach churns every time I think of the notion that religions in China entails patriotism to the communist government rather than being faithful to their own religious beliefs. I say all this not to demonize China. In fact, our two peoples share the same cultural root, and we have no animosity toward the Chinese people. We only hope that the freedom we are enjoying in Taiwan can also be shared by the Chinese people. We worry that the PRC expansionist dream does not stop at Taiwan. Its activities in the East and South China Seas have also been rampant. The gray zone activities below the threshold of war, including maritime militia or swarms of armed fishing boats taking direct orders from the PLA, are designed to expand its power and substantiate its excessive territorial claims. All these are causing concerns that peace is more difficult to sustain. We often talk about the war in Europe and the grave threat to peace in Asia as two separate theaters. The reality is that the two are highly interconnected and the impact is global. No one can shun from the consequences of the war in Ukraine. Even though this war occurred in Europe, many parts of the world have seen economic recession, weakening of currency, energy shortage, and disaster in stock markets, to name just a few. We have seen certain countries far away from Europe, despite being disinterested in the war, experiencing the exact same pain from the very high inflation rate. It will be the same, or even worse, if war is to break out in the Taiwan Strait, where roughly half % of the most advanced computer or semiconductor chips are produced. Imagine the shockwave Europe may experience if the supply chain is disrupted by war, especially a protracted war. My dear friends, what we are witnessing is that the two authoritarian forces are collaborating with each other, trading ever more with each other, feeding more to the hunger for expansion. While Russia may be weakened by war in Ukraine, its military might in the Far East seems to have remained relatively intact. We have recorded a number of occasions where Russian warships and strategic bombers conducted joint military exercises in the West Pacific with the PLA. The most recent one was just a few days ago, on June 6th. The Chinese leaders may have stopped talking about the limitless partnership with Russia, but their joint military exercises speak volume. And when Russian influence in Central Asia seems to be decreasing, the PRC has quickly filled the gap. In addition, the PRC now exercises greater influence in the Middle East, parts of Asia, parts of South Asia, and the entire continent of Africa than any other country. The sad reality in Latin America is that the leftist trend is friendly to Beijing, not to Washington or Brussels. The talk in the Indo-Pacific nowadays is that the PRC is quickly expanding its power and presence in the Pacific, with its security agreement with the Solomon Islands in April last year as a good example. The PRC has also been securing ports for future military use in the Indian Ocean, including Port Chittagong in Myanmar, Port Hambantota in Sri Lanka, Port Gwadar in Pakistan, to name just a few. This string of pearls strategy has turned many in South Asia very nervous. The disinformation campaign is particularly worrisome. It is designed to spread false information in Europe, to pit one party against another, and to create distrust in a society, to undermine the very basis of democracy. I have heard more than once that another great friend of Taiwan, Slovakia, is hit rather hard by this. I was told that many people there simply don't know what to believe anymore about the war in Ukraine. They have been exposed to so much disinformation and experienced hard time in identifying the truth. As you can see, the cyber warriors in the East have been going to Europe online. They think the whole free world is also free for them to serve and sabotage. This is taking toll on democracies in East and West alike. In Taiwan, we have also been bombarded by the narrative that the war in Ukraine was started by NATO, the United States to be in particular, that the United States has its conspiracy to weaken or destroy Vladimir Putin by throwing Ukraine against Russia, and that the US has no interest in saving Ukraine from destruction and atrocity by not sending American soldiers. The Chinese Communist government was waging this cognitive warfare against Taiwan by pushing the Russian narrative on us to not trust the US. To me, to shape US skepticism in Taiwan society is not only an attempt to distance Taiwan from the US, but also to affect the outcome of the coming national election. I know these all sound familiar to you, and what you are going through here in the cyberspace is also what we are going through in the Indo-Pacific. Geographical distance has never been a problem. Whatever doesn't kill us will make us stronger. We will be happy to share with you what we have learned in dealing with the challenges in the cyberspace. We will be stronger in this fight together. And we are seeing more countries in the East and West lining up with each other in this fight together. I have been watching with amazement how closely Japanese leaders are working with Europe lately. European leaders, including top EU officials, now pay more attention to the Indo-Pacific. Many countries, including the Czech Republic, together with the EU, have issued their own version of the Indo-Pacific strategy. And in this process, we in Taiwan have heard more senior international leaders commenting on the importance of peace and stability over the Taiwan Strait, including in the most recent G7 leaders communique. Now we are even hearing EU and European leaders saying that peace and stability over the Taiwan Strait is an integral part of global security and prosperity. And in this regard, they are telling the Chinese officials that peace over Taiwan is not their domestic affairs, but a matter of global concern. To show our appreciation, we want to make efforts to secure peace and stability by maintaining the status quo of the Taiwan Strait. We believe in peace, and war is not an option. In order to maintain peace, Taiwan will not bow to pressure and will not be a provocateur. And Taiwan pledges to maintain the status quo, which serves the best interests for the world. But I need to stress that maintaining the status quo and peace is a joint responsibility for the two sides of the Taiwan Strait. And it is also the expectation of the democracies around the world. And in order for Taiwan to stay strong and resilient, and to have the courage to continue the policy of maintaining the status quo, we do need support from European friends. Among all those who speak out for Taiwan, I would particularly like to thank the Czech Republic for being in the forefront. Senate President Vystrčil and Chairman of Deputy President Adamova separately led huge delegations to visit Taiwan despite mounting diplomatic pressure. It was also heartening that President Pavel, upon his election victory, would receive a congratulatory phone call from President Tsai. It takes the successes of late President Havel to have this vision and moral courage to connect with Taiwan. I should also highlight that Slovak government too has been organizing big mixed official business delegations to visit us, with the latest one came just last week. I'm also quite pleased to see that Lithuanian government keeps sending delegations to engage with Taiwan to those who break through huge pressure to connect with Taiwan, though maybe smaller in size and population in comparison to the bigger powers. You are true moral giants. We have also been receiving delegations from European Parliament and parliamentarians in the European countries who have touched us by traveling a long way to declare their support for Taiwan. The people of Taiwan are grateful for the actions to keep us from being alone in facing coercion. And that gives us courage and strength to stay free and democratic. I know you support Taiwan because Taiwan is a shining beacon of democracy. You support Taiwan also because you know what life is like for freedom to be stricken by communism. My dear friends, Taiwan will stay strong and resilient, knowing that we have you behind us. We know that the world is a different. Waking up to the outward expansion of autocracies and authoritarianism. What is at stake is our true belief in freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. I'm immensely proud to tell you that Taiwan shares the vision with you to safeguard the values we hold dear to our heart, for we are all faithful disciples of the visionary late President Havel. As authoritarian forces expand throughout the world, we democracies are left with but only one choice: to unite with each other. With the spirit of democratic solidarity, we will overcome the challenges together. And I have every confidence that when democracies in the East and West stand together, we will prevail. Thank you.
You're welcome.
下载中天新闻网 App 抽奖拿好康，小七咖啡很多人都有抽到，下一个幸运者可能就是你。国立海洋科技博物馆门票1张，位在基隆的国立海洋科技博物馆，最棒的亲子一日游室内景点，快来试试手气哦！下载中天新闻网 App 参加抽奖。新北水岸河滨自行车租借优惠券，平日租借只要5折，立刻下载中天新闻网 App 参加抽奖，就有机会5折畅游新北水岸。宜兰苏澳立桨冲浪体验优惠券，你有玩过立桨吗？没有的话，今年夏天不妨赶快体验一下，快来抽9折券。旺币最高一次抽到300枚旺币，累积足额可以换快点购折价券。下载中天新闻网 App 后，输入推荐代码，任选一个账号注册，填写完资料，来到中天复古乐园戳戳乐，上面有5项大奖项等你抽，赶快来下载中天新闻网 App 抽奖拿好康。